environment, and a third panelist. Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. On October 19, when the Houthis started launching missiles towards Israel, many people asked themselves, who the hell are these Houthis and why are they attacking us? What do you want? So we will try to answer this question and other questions. So very quickly, the Houthis, if you follow social media, became one of the most popular groups in the Middle East amongst Arab youngsters, and they are perceived as the entity that stands and fight against Israel and the U.S. Those Shia rebels that had local agenda in Yemen became a regional player, a significant regional player, and now it's a global problem. And the connection of Iran to the Houthis is not classic. It's way more complicated. It's very different from the connection between Iran and Hezbollah. Iran takes advantage of the Houthi strategic locations because they have control of the straits and they want to use them in order to harm Saudi Arabia. The connection of Iran and the Houthis is not the closest relations, but it's becoming closer, and today it's way stronger than it used to be. Iran understands that the Houthis are an asset for her. With regards to the Americans, the operation that the Americans are activating in the Red Sea is very important, and they undermine Houthis' capabilities, but they do not deter them. And we need to understand that fighting with the Houthis is like fighting with fog. They have asymmetrical tactics and they are embedded in the population. So that sounds familiar. When we speak about solutions and strategies, there are no magic solutions with the Houthis. As someone who's been following their activities in the past 15 years or so, we must say it. What can we do about it? There are several possibilities. First of all, to push forward an agreement between them and the Saudis. Such an agreement will provide them with lots of resources within and influence within Yemen, which means like buying peace of mind, and it actually includes a potential to harm the connection between Iran and the Houthis, so that's why it's very desirable. But in this scenario, the Houthis will remain their power and the potential to be a strategic threat in the Middle East as in Red Sea as well. So the other key, and it goes back to the previous panel, the other key is with Iran. We can make Iran by force or otherwise to influence them to hold their weapons. But the problem with that is, contrary to what they claim, Iran doesn't have total influence over the Houthis. And secondly, the U.S. maybe is the only one that can collect a high price from Iran, is not interested in this scenario. I think we should not start fighting the Houthis directly. There are people who disagree with me, who believe that we should have react, but we think in a different way. There are other ways to do it, and not publicly. On a different note, in days when this institute, the INSS, is attacked, and as being part of the conception, it's important for me to say that we did warn for years. We've been warning about the Houthis and about other matters related to the Red Sea. In order to go further and talk about the different aspects of war at the Red Sea, I would like to interview two of my colleagues, Yuval Eylon, an expert of maritime strategy. He served 30 years in the Navy, and he was the head of Intel in the Navy, and also Galit Cohen, the head of the program of climate and national security at the Institute. She's been working previously in the ministry and was the Director General of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. First question is to you, Yuval. Please explain to us how global economy is affected by Houthis attacks and what is the importance of the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. Good afternoon. We're so lucky to have the Houthis, otherwise we won't be speaking about the seas. So eventually, at last, Israel understands the meaning, the significance of the waters. We are an island state, and the influence of the sea is so cardinal here. And I'll explain a little bit how this influence is related to national security, but it's the most significant economic and element. So the economy depends on the maritime routes because goods are shipped through the oceans. And when you look at global routes, you can see a very complex map. But in general, you can see, as you can see here, these are the routes, like on the road. So most global commerce use two forms of shipment. One through, it goes from east to west, from Far East to US. It does it from the eastern side and from east to Europe or the west. So it goes through the eastern part. So this is where Bab el Mandel is, Suez Canal, Gibraltar, everything main points. And these are the straits that affect global commerce. The Houthis understand that very well, and not only them. Look at what's going on in Ukraine, but let's go back for a moment to the Houthis who understand all that. They understand that between 17 and 20% of global economy use Bab el Mandeb and Suez Canal. So they use a technique of preventing access. They prevent access to the Red Sea. They manage to prevent access to between 17 to 20% of economical activity is there. And after they started the attacks, the shipment we tried to bypass it. And 50% of the traffic in Suez Canal, which is a very significant economic resource for Egypt, stopped using the Suez Canal. And why is it so interesting for the rest of the world? Not necessarily because of Suez Canal. It's because that the other route that leads from east to other countries, mostly developed countries, is also threatened. It's threatened by the climate crisis. Panama Canal today is also limited. If you want to move from China to Boston Harbor, you need to go through Panama Canal. It's also threatened, and Galit will speak about it later. Galit, the floor is yours. How do interruption in or disruption in maritime commerce? How do they affect Israel, and how do they affect production chains? So we talk about 20% of the goods that reach Israel. It goes through the Red Sea, mostly from the east. Goods of different kinds, as we know, about 30% of the containers that reach Israel. So it means that the problem in the Red Sea is very painful, and it's very painful to the entire world. It hasn't affected that much in Israel. Overall, we managed to overcome it. Right, there were about 21 days of extension in terms of budget, or let's say financial element. We speak about $700, $800 addition per container. And Igil Maor, who works on my team, made this calculation. It's not that significant, but that's in the short term. But if we look at the longer term, it might bring about geostrategic changes which are very significant of the movement or traffic of goods in the sea. When I look at it, we say, wait a minute, well, this is one point. The Red Sea and this whole story just shows us this war there. It just actually made it more clearer to us how the supply chains, Israel's supply chain, is vulnerable. So you said that we were an island. The harm to supply chains, when we started thinking about it a year ago, the vulnerability of the supply chain is based on geopolitical elements. So we see what's going on, but there are also the sanctions. We just begin to experience. And these are now usual sanctions. They are multidimensional. There's something else. It's not as if they don't want to sell anything to Israel. It's not only that. there will be other sanctions. So this whole matter of financial risk, global inflation, there are other multiple risks that can threaten us, and demographic changes. There are more people who need the same goods, and of course climate changes. When all of this connect, and it happen, it is easy, it sometimes happen, we understand how vulnerable we are and what we should do in order to cope with it and prepare better. Now I'd like to give you an example from different sectors. We started to work with the food sector. So in the food sector, you mentioned an island country. 60% of the calories consumed in Israel derive from imports. So how do we deal? What do we should do in order to guarantee the continuation of a supply of these raw materials in light of all these risks? And if we look at the around the world, 8 countries supply all the wheat for all the countries in the world. So there are major risks here. So I'll give you an example from yesterday. Yesterday they talked about importing cattle. So they talked about it yesterday. Although I'm a vegetarian, I'll speak about it. So they actually ship them from Australia, and because of Australian regulation, we cannot import cattle from Australia. So they started importing from Portugal, but then there was a pandemic there, and you cannot bring cattle from there. And what's going on in Israel? And the same, so we totally killed a local production because we wanted to reduce the cost of living, because we wanted competition, because we wanted many things. So we actually eliminated our local production ability. So when we look at all these risks, we have to think very cautiously about the balance we want to reach. Import versus local production, and in light of all these risks. So Yuval, back to you. So, if you think about it at the military level, how do you suggest that Israel deal with the Houthis? They are a group of terrorists, but they're quite established, and we've been researching them for a while. The Houthis are very serious military force, but it's not. But we will need to learn a lot about ourselves. So, in fact, the Houthis use asymmetrical technologies that exist in other terror that exists that are used by other terror groups. So they use munition and to prevent access. How do you do that? They use missiles, unmanned aircraft, they kidnap ships. The world needs to understand that with such asymmetrical perception, a missile, they can actually conceal a missile in a cave, and then within 15 minutes they can launch it and hit a ship. So if you want to deal with such a force that has asymmetrical perceptions, you need to know how to prepare, because in due day you'll have to deal with the residual threats. Because if you deal with all the symmetrical threats and you neglect the other threats, you are going to be in problem, because it's going to be very difficult for you to cope with the threats. And it's enough if one missile hits a ship, and we heard yesterday that people were killed. So all it takes is one missile to hit the right one place, and it doesn't matter how many ships will sail in the Red Sea and try to provide it to protect it. Just it's not enough when you deal with terrorists and asymmetrical forces. Galit, back to you. What are the risks and opportunities at the regional level and at the global level to guarantee the stability of supply chains to Israel? So, as was formally mentioned by several speakers today, it's not only Israel's war. This tension is not only between Israel and Hamas. When we look at supply chains, global supply chains, we really meet the same tension between the superpowers. And in this place, when we realize that the supply chains, they behave in their networks, and where does Israel see itself? How can we think about ways to cope and minimize risks? So here we meet again the strategy which we discussed earlier, the ways countries diminish the risks with regards to supply chains. One of the main strategies is to shorten supply chains. Today, Israel's chains are so long and so complicated, and if we want to decrease them, we want to minimize risks and to shorten them, which means, again, we need these regional partnerships that we've been discussing with the countries in our region. If we are smart enough to do it, it will actually make these supply chains more stable. So it's the same strategy. And if we manage to become partners with Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, these motorous countries under the auspices of the US, we will diminish the risks. We will minimize their risk as well. And we know when we spoke already about Jordan and Egypt, that this is our security strategy, this partnership, the realization that this economic partnership and dependency. This is mutual dependency, and this is the right way to go about it. If we do it the right way, we'll be able to find solution. Thank you very much. We'll end just in two sentences: challenges and opportunity. The challenge, well, I assume that Yemen and the Houthis, even after an agreement or even after the war ended, the Houthis will continue to, in the foreseeable future at least, will continue to be a security problem for the Middle East and for the world in general. And if not enough, Iran is trying to actually go back to the Red Sea after it was kicked out from the Red Sea a few years ago. So it tries to go back through Sudan to open an embassy in Sudan and to do other things. And this is the challenge. And how about the opportunity? In 2020, the Red Sea Alliance was established by Saudi Arabia. It's actually a partnership of countries that are on the border of the Red Sea, but Israel is excluded. But such an alliance is also an opportunity to increase regional cooperation with regards to security matters and softer matters like protecting the maritime environment. Thank you very much.